8th episode of the Wokeish podcast. This is Ebony.
And this is Zelma.
Thanks so much for listening. So we're going to start out with our shout-out segment.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about this hashtag that has been going around in the Latino community, or at least Latinos who speak Spanish. And it's in response to, it's gone so viral. I'm sure a lot of people have seen the racist rant by Aaron Schlossberg. And he's like this lawyer that apparently was really upset that there was employees speaking Spanish to customers in like a restaurant in New York. And so he went off saying that this is America, you should be speaking English. The people speaking Spanish are probably undocumented, that he's probably paying for their welfare. Just like all these terrible things. And then another video surfaced where he was saying racist things against a guy who he perceived was not white but turned out to be white, telling him once again, like, get out of my country. And so as a result of that video going viral, lots of people, of course, were really offended. And there was even like a congressman that called for an official complaint against him. He was like evicted from the leasing space where he had his law office, and he's just been all over different media negatively. And so as a result of that, people started this hashtag saying still speaking Spanish y which means and what. And so Latinos are just kind of giving the narrative or different examples of when people try to tell them that they couldn't speak Spanish, but how that's still not going to stop them from speaking Spanish. And so they'll provide a little narrative, and then with the hashtag still speaking Spanish y And so for me, I've had several instances, even in school, where people told me to speak English, not Spanish. And I wish that I could have been, I was a kid, so I didn't have the agency or the ability to be able to tell my teachers, like, no, like, it's actually like a privilege. And I think in most other countries, most people speak more than one language. And so I was just really kind of proud of our community for responding in this way. And then just wanted to shout out the mariachis who were playing music in front of his office, because I just love when people are petty, and it was just really nice to see people responding really just in a way that shows, like, yes, you can be racist and you can say these things, but that doesn't mean that that's going to impact how I live my life. And so just wanted to shout out that hashtag and just uplift, the Latino communities, particularly those of us speaking Spanish, because in this era of Trump, sometimes even now, like today I went to Chipotle in a predominantly white neighborhood, and the employee spoke Spanish to me, like English to everyone else, but Spanish to me. And I saw that as like a secret handshake. It was just kind of like in that moment we were both able to connect. But a part of me was kind of looking around. Are people upset? Like, are people looking at me funny? So it definitely impacts us. It doesn't matter how educated, how young, where you are in this country. There are just people are more open to being really just rude and racist, and so the little ways that we can fight back, I'm all for.
Okay, and the second person that we wanted to shout out is Stacey Abrams. I don't know a whole lot about her, but I do know that she's the first female African American to get the Democratic bid to become governor in Georgia. So we are going to hope that all of our, Georgians come out in full force to elect her, and, fingers crossed about that. Shout out to Stacey.
Yes.
So now moving on to our In the Know segment. Okay, so now transitioning into our In the Know segment. So we'll be discussing the royal wedding.
Yes.
Yes. That took place this past week, and there was a ton of press and, media about it. People had a lot of opinions, both positive and negative. As you can imagine, people have tons of positive and negative feelings about everything.
Yes.
So, I guess the kind of like big thing is that Meghan Markle, who is a biracial woman from Inglewood, woo woo, shout out to California, became royalty. So she married a prince, which is really crazy, and I think blows a lot of people's minds. I've been seeing a lot of stuff going around, like, where are my good friends at? Like,
yeah.
None of my good friends are introducing me to princes.
Yeah, because she was set up on a blind date with him. That's how she met
and it's
him.
like, I'm really just curious about who this friend is and how they even have friends in common in the first place.
They showed a picture of her because she was invited to the wedding.
Oh, really?
And they're like, the matchmaker who made it all happen.
I need to look her up because that is hilarious.
Yeah.
So, if you watched the wedding, and I think it's still on Hulu, so you can go back and check that out. So she just went all out. Like she had a black chaplain, a black bishop, a black cellist, a black choir. So I thought that all of that was dope.
And her mom, got a lot of props for like wearing her natural hair and like in dreads and her little nose ring.
I thought that was weird. Like, what did they expect her to do? Put on a wig?
I don't know. By the reaction, it was like people were like, "Oh, thank God!" Like they didn't make. Maybe they thought they were gonna make her like straighten her hair.
You can't. Once you have dreads, you can't do anything.
Or
with
like
it.
maybe
the only thing she could have done is put on a wig.
Maybe they
that would have been wild. Oh my God, I couldn't imagine the reactions if she would have done that.
That's true.
That would have stole the show.
Because she's like a yoga teacher.
Yeah,
she's
that would have stolen the show. Like people would have. Oh my God! There would have been so much negative press about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad that she just showed up. Like
Yeah. And it was so sad because I don't follow this stuff, but my mom does, and so I was like thinking that her dad was just not in the picture, and my mom was like, no, he had a heart attack.
Yeah.
Like all of this just really I don't know if the word is stressed, but maybe he was just overwhelmed, like, oh my God, my daughter's becoming royalty. And I also hadn't thought about the impact that this would have on her family.
Yeah. No, the dad said that it was negative stress from, like, paparazzi always wanting, like, he said that they were always at his door. I mean, even with Meghan Markle, the love scenes from the show that she was on, Suits, were put on Pornhub. And then they put out articles saying Harry's girl is a porn star.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I've never even watched that show.
And then she found someone, like a paparazzi was in her garage one day to try to get a picture of her.
How scary.
Yeah, so it's like, hearing those stories about how they treated her, I'm not surprised that they would go to those lengths to try to, like, get any information from her dad. And so he was saying that he was living his life in Mexico, really chill. She and him didn't have a terrible relationship. And sadly, after all this press, which is also one of the big issues that Princess Diana had, her relationship with the media was always like that's how she died. Yeah. They were chasing her. And so I think that on the one side, I see his point. He's not choosing to be in the spotlight. And the paparazzi can be so aggressive. Like sometimes how they even treat celebrities is really terrible. And celebrities talk about it all the time. And so his heart problem and him not being able to go to the wedding, it was just really sad. And I felt, and one of the moments that was being shared was her mom sitting by herself and just like how she handled being the only member of her family at the wedding. And I was like,
wait, where was her other family? I heard my mom was saying also that her siblings had kind of expressed some irritation about her half siblings, that like their life was being changed and that they didn't choose it.
Although her half sister is writing a book, and then
about being the sibling of someone.
Yes,
oh my God,
and then her half brother apparently sells marijuana in California and named one of the strains Meghan Markle Sparkle. So they're like definitely capitalizing on her.
That is hilarious.
I know. So the other side of me is like, okay, like if you're
fake outrage.
Yeah, you can't like be mad, but then also use that to kind of gain some profit for yourself. So I was like, okay, if my brother did that, and her half brother did that, then I would be like, okay, maybe you're not coming to meet the queen.
Yeah, no, it's like, what, I think that it's, and then I initially I thought that maybe, I didn't know that they were her half siblings at first, and so I was like, okay, maybe they are younger than her, and they're kind of, upset that their life has to be put on pause and all this stuff, but it's like, no, apparently her half siblings are like the same age as her mother, so it's like you're not like they're like that. In their late 40s or maybe early 50s, so it's not like you're what are you really sacrificing?
No, yeah.
It's like, this is probably a good change of pace.
I mean, you could have been at the wedding, but you acted a fool and didn't get invited.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you act like trash, you get treated like trash.
Yeah, and so there was initially, I was reading criticism against Meghan Markle because they were saying that even though she was like a huge proponent about gender inequality and she calls herself a feminist, that she didn't really say anything about Black Lives Matter or expressed any remarks about racial justice. And so they were saying that her inclusion of so many Black people in her wedding and embracing that side was quote unquote refreshing, and they were really glad that she was kind of, and so it makes me think like maybe she just didn't find it important to really highlight. And as a biracial person, she claims, you know, that she's always had difficult experiences, and so I know sometimes people who are mixed or biracial choose to identify in various different ways, either by identifying as biracial or being really inclusive of both, or saying like, no, I'm just a mixture. And so I thought like maybe that's what was going on with her. She was choosing to distance herself from either identifying as white or identifying as Black. But I felt with the wedding, she did a really good job of being like inclusive and like in your face about like even the song choice, Stand By Me, the fact that you know, the Black sermon, like I mean the sermon, I don't know if you heard it, but like he hit at like slavery, like talked about, you know, and so and Harry and Meghan like chose everything, like the passages, what he was drawing from, because I saw an interview from the bishop when he was on The View, and he was talking about like how they gave him all this stuff already and he just went with it. And so I thought that was really nice that she, you know, and they said that she really played a part in having all these details in her wedding. So I thought that was really cool of her to really embrace that and to show the world that, like, because she could have just minimized it and just been like, you know, I mean, race doesn't matter.
Love
race,
is love.
Yeah. But I think that was a thing, like, love is love, but, like, I'm going to remind you that I am not, you know.
And it's something, and I think also it's like, you know, obviously y'all see it from the outside looking in, but I want you to know that I'm aware of it as well. Like, this is not something that I'm just kind of brushing over. Like, I know we are an interracial marriage, and I know this is a big deal given the context. And because it's, you know, the royal family, and she's like, I'm gonna, even though this is a royal family, I'm gonna make sure that I insert myself and my interests and my identity into this wedding. Like, it's not, I'm not just being, you know, shepherded along and just kind of going on with everything, you know? So I definitely appreciated that too. Yeah,
and although there was like so many good and so many people being happy, and you know, there's Black inclusion, there were people who were saying we're reading way too much into what this relationship means, because a lot of times symbolic things are taken to mean like this is a mark of progress. So like look how far we've gotten when we can have a Black princess. And so a lot of people were saying, well, I don't know if this is really progress. And so I was reading this article, and it talks about how we can't bypass the fact that the monarchy is such a symbol of whiteness. Like, it has been a symbol of whiteness in the United Kingdom for such a long time. And so there's this quote that says, "It is absurd to think that one Black woman could transform an institution so rooted in colonialism and whiteness. We have seen this approach to combating racism on an institutional level many times before." So even thinking that, even, you know, and I think of the case of Loving versus, I forgot, Virginia, thinking like, you know, I saw the movie, and the movie was very much, oh, like, look at this love story, that they overcame all odds. But if you really read about it, like, they couldn't live near their family. They couldn't, it was really, they sacrificed a lot. Like, it wasn't just really, I mean, they were constantly being attacked. They were constantly being called the cops on. Like, it wasn't really the same love story that people like to portray. And so when they were talking, you know, when people were saying this criticism, I thought that it was a fair point. And although some people responded with, why can't we just have an event where we can just be happy? Why can't we just enjoy it? I think it's important for us to not really forget that this is a wedding, and yes, it is a big it's a historical thing to have this happen because 1, she's divorced, 2, she's biracial, 3, she's American. But also, there's so much inequality in the United Kingdom in terms of black-white disparities. And so a lot of black people in the UK were saying, yes, it's nice to have this happening, but what is that going to change for me?
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of times we kind of, I mean, I don't know who this we is, but I think that people generally kind of impose their own perspectives and their own narratives on something that it has nothing to do with that. You know, so these people could just be 2 people in love.
Yeah.
That want to get married and don't necessarily intend for it to be this super monumental thing, but because we see it externally as like this big deal, we're kind of imposing on them all of our critiques of what the racial meanings of this are, and if it's going to change anything, and how political it is, and how like socio-political it is. And it's like, no, these might just be 2 people in love and they want to get married, and maybe wouldn't choose this way to do it if they didn't have to.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like they're constrained by, you know, the context, but who's to say that that's even something that they really care that much about?
Yeah, like, I don't think Megan was like, this isn't my wedding.
Yeah.
It's a chance for me to highlight that black people, we can do anything we want. And so
we can become royalty.
Yeah, and then speaking of that, a lot of, you know, people here in the stateside were like, why are we obsessing so much about this first black princess when there's been so much black royalty already? Yeah. And then, like, you know, some of the jokes were like coming to America royalty, but for the other part, people were highlighting like, no, there's like actual black royalty. Like, there are black people who are actual princes and princesses, and then I saw a thread, and it was like, of course, Charlemagne, and he was saying that, you know, F that, we're all kings and queens. And then within those comments, I saw this comment by this guy, and he was like, yeah, but then there's like actual royalty. We can't always be calling ourselves, and he was talking about like black people because he was black. He's like, we can't always be calling ourselves kings and queens, because would you really equate yourself with actual royalty from whatever country? And so I was surprised. There was like over 300 replies, like in that, for that thread, like so many people had so many
responding to that guy.
Yeah, about whether it was like this discussion between calling themselves queens and kings, and I was just really surprised that was something that got so much like tension, like the fact that Charlemagne was, we are already kings and queens, and people were, nah, why do we have to do that? Why do we always have to make ourselves like that?
Yeah, I think it's like I think it comes from the whole like, oh, we descend from royalty kind of thing, and ancestrally, you know, like there are people we don't know necessarily, you know, like whose lineage that is. So I think that there's that. I didn't see this thread myself, but I know that there's also people who, like, say, like, Black Israelites, and that's a whole other conversation.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, those people also buy into that. And so I can kind of see both sides. It's like, you know, I don't know. I think that even, like, say, for instance, like the Queen, right? The Queen doesn't actually have any power. If we're talking about what royalty means or what it actually stands for, there's a conversation and an argument to be made against that too. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if I necessarily have a stance either way. I just know I can see why people would have an argument on both sides.
Yeah, I was just surprised at how much back and forth there was on just that one thing, and I was like, oh, we're moving away from like
the actual point.
Whether this means progress or not, and sticking to like, why are we referring to ourselves to royalty?
Well, it definitely does. I don't think it means anything for people in the United States. If there is anything that this wedding can do, I don't think that it would touch us here. You know, if anything, we might be able to talk about, you know, maybe British folks and like if it matters for people in the UK. But outside of that, like,
no. I mean, I still think it's really, really awesome that someone from LA who was just like, and the joke is, you know, she was on Deal or No Deal. And she was a briefcase girl. And so it's just like, you know, someone who is just like a model and then, you know, became an actress, now is royalty and is a duchess. And so
there's hope for all of us.
I think that in itself is, aside from like the race politics and whether this is symbolic, it's so crazy to have someone American who's not part of the royal family marry someone who's 6 in line to the throne.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just really crazy. And I mean, I watched not all of it because it was like 4 hours. But so I did watch some of it. I'm a wedding person. I like watching weddings, and I am one of those people that they're definitely in love. You can see it. And I just, I watched her on Suits. I liked her character on Suits, so I always am that type of person that's the character is how she must really be.
Yeah.
And so to me, I was just, oh, look, she's from a paralegal to a lawyer, and now she's a princess, and so I'm all for it. I hope that they last. I hope that she doesn't, just from the little hints at how they treated her, I hope that she isn't scrutinized. She's constantly being compared to Kate Middleton. There's like this really famous racist person. She's a woman in the UK, and she already, like the day of her wedding, put a picture of Meghan and a picture of Kate and said, "You can't fight class." And it's just like...
she's a hater.
Yeah, so just kind of hoping that she just doesn't get... I mean, she is.
Can they not last? Is that even an option?
What?
For them to not...
You can get divorced. Like Prince
Diana
and Charles got divorced.
But, would they... I mean, well, there's a whole lot of conspiracy about that, though.
But they didn't get divorced?
No, that they did, but that, she didn't necessarily die accidentally.
Oh, so it's he could remarry.
So it's conspiracy theory, and I'm not saying that I buy into it, but it's would that even be allowed? Culturally, and I don't know how much hold his grandmother has on him. Probably not a whole bunch, since he's marrying this black girl. But
that's true.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It seems like
So we'll see. We'll keep. I'm sure there'll be more conversations, especially if they have kids, and what that will be, and and backlash, because there's always backlash. I mean, there was backlash to this wedding, but just keeping an eye on it. But just wanted to kind of hit on something positive, but also have a more kind of serious discussion, so that we're not always just talking about the easy to grab political stories. Sometimes there's politics in everyday life, and sometimes it can be fun to talk about them. It doesn't always have to be really dreary and sad, and so wanted to kind of mix it up for this week's In the Know and talk about something that was kind of nice. And if you watched it, and if you didn't, I don't think that it speaks. I know finally one of the final points I wanted to bring up is some people were saying that it was wrong for people to focus so much on the wedding when there's so many other more important things to focus on. And I saw this one...
But can we really, are we surprised by that?
That we're focusing on some...
Yeah.
I mean, the media, every day, it has short memory. And I'm the type of person that's I can't listen to... I'm a minority.
Yeah.
I'm an immigrant. I am already every day facing, terrible news, terrible things. If for, 2 hours, I just want to watch this really pretty dress walk down the aisle and listen to this choir sing Stand By Me and not think about Trump or think about all these other things, then
Because there's plenty of people who live their everyday lives without having a thought about that.
So I'm one of those people that was if you watched it, I do not think that takes away from you being woke. I do not think that takes away from you being for the community, from you being a worker. There's self-care. You can't always just be on. You can't always. There's always going to be time to do that. And so wanted to make sure to bring that up, because I did see that back and forth in social media with some people being really critical about people who took time to watch it, or who were saying things about it, how it was kind of a waste of time. And I mean, I do think you shouldn't be talking about it for a whole week, but I think that every once in a while, a nice, thinking and talking about something kind of a little lighter is much needed.
Agreed. Okay, so now we're going to transition into what's being slept on. Okay, so now shifting gears into our What's Being Slept On segment. So this week we're talking about interracial partnering, kind of just, continuing on the same kind of line of, I guess, topics or whatever from the In the Know segment. So to get kind of started out, I guess we're going to start off by talking about whether or not we're beyond kind of social animosity toward interracial partnering. So, I mean, what do you think, Z? Do you think we're at a point where people aren't really... where it's not really that big a deal. And I mean, I guess this probably varies depending on, you know, what the race is of the people in the relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
But do you think that there's still kind of...
I think that it's definitely more common now, just based on like statistics and rates of people that are in interracial relationships. And also, I think like even doing where they do surveys about, well, it's different because I think it's really complicated because they ask people if they're more comfortable, if they're okay with interracial partnering, and then generally people say okay. But then when they ask, would you be okay with your daughter or son being in an interracial relationship, people have different answers to that. So it's one of those things where I think that people would generally say that there's less animosity towards interracial partnering, but just like what we see with the whole like Trump backlash, I think that there's like a lot of coded microaggressive thoughts about what that really means when it happens in your family. And I also think it depends on who the two types of racial ethnic pairings are. So I think that maybe for some groups it might be more acceptable and more welcoming and less, I guess, maybe draw less criticism to pair with certain racial ethnic groups, whereas for others it may still be really taboo or really negative. And I also think people lie. I think people
lie about how they feel about it?
Yeah. I think generally people, I don't know. And I draw this from my experience because I've only dated people outside my race. And that's all due to the fact that I was in mostly white spaces. And so, like, people, and it's different reactions from my family who's Latino to the families of the people that I dated. And it's always on superficially, like, accepting, but then there are comments and like, well, have you thought about questions that I'm kind of like, whoa, that's kind of like something. And so like for the relationship I'm in now, like he told me that his family had a talk about like, about like, so if this is someone that you want to be serious with.
And how many, like, who was a part of this talk?
It was the dad.
Okay.
The mom was totally, like, she's all in. She's like, love is love, whatever. But his dad was like, okay, so there are different things that happen that you're going to have to encounter when you... And it's really funny because then, like, to me and in front of me, there would be lots of talk about, like, oh, I don't care. Lots of inclusion. And I don't think I was even supposed to know about that talk. It was just something that my partner told me. And it's just kind of like, and, you know, also, I mean, his dad is from a really different generation. Like, his dad's a lot older. He's even older than my mom by like 15 years. And so I think that, and he grew up in a really small town. And so I think that his context was, well, at least what I tell myself is like, just that's not something that's very common in his family. That's not something that he's ever probably in his life thought that would happen because none of his other kids are in interracial relationships. And so that's why I say, like, and I don't think that he's racist. I honestly don't think that he thinks like Mexicans are bad people. But I do think that he thinks that it would be easier if white people married white people and Mexican people married Mexican people. So that's why I think that, like, people might say that there's less animosity, but there's just so much coded, like, challenges and criticism that kind of hint at, like, maybe you're not really as okay with it if you really had to think about how you would feel if it happened in your family. Right. So you're okay with the idea, but not with it actually playing out.
Yeah, so do you think that... Okay, so you were saying that you think that it might be easier for certain groups. Like, what groups do you think that it might be easier for now? Because, I mean, I'm thinking, like, there are certain groups that... There are certain types of interracial partnerships that I've never even seen. You know? Or that, like, when I do see it, like, I don't think it's a problem, but when I do see it, I'm like, oh, you know, I wonder how they met, you know?
Yeah, I think, like, maybe for... If it's two minority groups, it might be a little easier to, there's more shared experience. And so like, when I have friends who are Latina who date people who are like Black guys or Black women, I feel like they don't have the same types of obstacles or the same type, like we don't, just because they're interracial isn't the same way as for me, who I've dated only white people. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I have to talk about, like, there are times where I am literally the only non-white person in a room. Mm-hmm. And it's not intentional where they, like, are choosing to, they're like, only white people is that's the only type of people I want to surround myself. But because of segregation and because of segregated networks and because of issues of class, like, the people that I happened to date were only around other white people. Yeah. And so they weren't even, and I don't even think they were as aware at how white their networks were until I was there. And so I just remember lots of instances where I'd be at a party and the only other people who were not white were the waiters or the servers. Mm-hmm. And so I think, and talking to my like Latina friends who date Black guys, like, they don't ever talk about how I'm the only, like, non-white person. Yeah. It's like, no, because their networks, you know, the Black guys usually have other people of color. And so I think that for me, it's a little, and I don't know if it's easier because sometimes it's hard to, because I don't know, you know, dating a Black guy, maybe there are things that they have to, like, you know, in terms of, like, police and, like, being stopped and, mm-hmm. like, risking and stuff like that I don't have to deal with my partner being white. Like, my partner's never, like, stopped by the police because they think that he's being a criminal. But we have them pulled over and people are like, so who is she? Mm-hmm. Like, kind of like, I'm the person that they're kind of like, well, what is she doing here? Mm-hmm. And thinking, like, is that racial? Do they think that I'm, like, a prostitute? Do they mm-hmm. think that I don't belong here? Do they think that I'm, like, a drug dealer and I'm selling them drugs? And so, and when I said that reference, I was talking more to, like, maybe it might be easier for two minority groups to be able to date and have more shared experiences about discrimination and being a minority in this country, as opposed to my experience where I've dated someone from, like, the dominant racial group where you just see how much easier, like, it is in their day-to-day experience and how much less, like, how much more trust there is for them and how much more resources they have and how much more, like, of a good old boys club there is, where they just get things that I have never seen, like, my friends or my networks get. And so I think that in that way, maybe it is a little easier for some pairings. But I think that you make a good point too in saying that I also don't see some racial ethnic couples either. Like, yeah. And it'd be interesting to see, like, what's the most common and what's the least common. And we are going to talk about in this part of the episode some statistics that we've gotten. And I also wanted to talk about, like, before we go any further, that we're going to discuss both different sex couples and same-sex couples, because I know that sometimes in discussions, people who are in same-sex couples are excluded from the conversation because when we talk about couples, it's already assumed that it is heterosexual. And so in this specific segment, and because of the type of work that I do, where I focus on the experiences of sexual minorities, we're definitely going to talk about how this would look like and some of the issues that same-sex couples have in terms of interracial couples. And I think one of the interesting things to start with is that, you know, interracial dating is slightly more common in same-sex couples than in heterosexual couples. More than 20% of same-sex couples are interracial, compared to about 17 or 18% of straight couples. So I think that in itself is it's interesting to see that among same-sex couples, there's a higher probability of you being in an interracial relationship. But definitely don't want anyone who's listening to feel that their relationship is being excluded because we are in our conversation, although I've only been in heterosexual relationships, we're definitely not forgetting that there are people who are in same-sex couples. And so I know you kind of posed this earlier, Ebony, but do you think that there are certain relationships or partnerships that are more acceptable? I know I talked about based on my experience, but I know you do a lot of family and dating work. Like, what have you come across?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess for myself, to give a little bit of like context for where my perspective comes from, just like from a personal sense. So my family is very racially mixed. So growing up, I did see a lot of different partnerships, and my family is very open. Like I've dated interracially myself, and have brought people that are not Black home to meet family, and that has never really been an issue. But I do think that it has been my experience that when we are out, or when we were out, it was, you see, I think that when it comes to Black women dating men that are not Black is still a little bit weird. Mm. And I think that if they're white, maybe it's a little less weird. But I think that Black women dating Asian men, dating even some Latinos is weird. Yeah, and yeah. So that's just like my personal kind of, view in terms of my experience. But in terms of like research, I think that that Black and Asian partnerings are like kind of really uncommon. I think that Latino and Asian partnerings are really uncommon.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And that's also, just in terms of like what I've seen, like I think maybe one time I've seen like Latino and Asian partnering. And I think also it depends on, where, like what the Asian subgroup is. Mm. So I can personally think of like people that I've gone to school with who are, I want to say someone from Chile and someone from Pakistan partnering together. Yeah. Okay. And so that was like super, and they have kids too. But I think that people have a hard time doing that research just because the numbers are so small.
Yeah.
So those people are hard to find. I think that as far as those people are concerned, though, they probably still do have a really hard time. And I think like something that we were talking about before we started recording is how raising kids can make, race conversations more important and like more critical to have, because depending on who the kid looks like, one parent may not look like the child, and so it's like having to constantly explain that this is my kid. And I've seen that in like movies and stuff where it'll be, actually there was one movie where I guess the little girl, she was Black and white, and she was beefing with her dad for some reason. Her dad was a white guy, and she like ran away from him, and he went to try to go get her, and then she started screaming like, I don't know this guy, and then the dad, like a police officer walked up and is like, who are you? And him trying to explain like, this is my daughter, and him being like, I don't know about that, like this is a little Black girl, like I know, but yeah, just thinking about like, even though this is a movie, like what the real life implications of that are, like how it might be to raise a child that looks like another race, and having to kind of like explain or defend yourself, or even like on the, on a different note, like having to reconcile, raising a child and how you talk to your child about their identity, or, that day that your kid comes home from school and is like, oh, people are saying that, I'm not this, or I am this. Like, how do you have that conversation? And I've seen a lot of, celebrities, or like backlash to celebrities that are, like, for instance, Kim Kardashian, right? So people have talked about how Kim Kardashian is kind of like, she tries to be like race neutral, and like she doesn't see race and all this stuff. And it's like, well, how do you not see race when you're raising Black children? Yeah. You're raising a Black son. Like how, you have to have, especially in this political climate, like you have to have those conversations. And which kind of leads into like, there was something that you brought up that I wanted to ask about, where you kind of brought up the segregation and kind of how these, like, I guess racial segregation of networks kind of brings up how a lot of the things that we think about are kind of being individualized and choice-based and a very personal kind of decision. Like, we think about partnering and dating as being, love is love, right?
Yeah.
But love is also not blind. And love also is a consequence of, structures and, like you said, segregation and all of that stuff. So there was a book published recently called Marriage, Vows, and Racial Choices. And the book is, I guess, it's by Jessica Vasquez Tokos. So to kind of summarize, like, she talks about how choosing who you marry involves more than just emotion and love, It's also about racial politics, cultural mores, local demographics, and how those things shape who is even available to you to choose from, right? So if you're in predominantly same race spaces, then you may never encounter, maybe it's a little bit different now with internet dating and stuff like that, but you may never encounter people that are a different race to even choose from those people. Or like you said, like you were in predominantly white spaces, and so maybe you didn't have anybody who was like Mexican or Latino in general to choose from.
I didn't.
And also in terms of, maybe if this wasn't the case for you, or, it seemed like you were saying that your mom was kind of open, or your family in general was kind of open, but for some people, like I have guy friends whose moms are like, no, you better bring home a Black woman, period. There's no conversation about that. And so who your family is open to, or the kind of things that are passed on to you by your family influence who you partner with or who you see as an ideal partner.
Yeah.
So one of the stories that she opens with is how someone that she interviewed was saying how this woman was Latina, and within her family there were people that were off limits. There were people that were like, okay, this is good, like for you to partner with this person, and there were people that were preferred. So for this Latina, her family preferred that she married with someone white or someone who was Latino but well off. If she partnered with someone who was Latino but not from the same background, not from the same ethnic background, then that was okay. And then Black men were just completely off limits. And so that then, obviously you're not gonna, like, if you fall in love with somebody, you're probably not gonna be like, no, I cannot do this because my family won't like it. But that probably influences who you even entertain.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot that comes, like, we act like there aren't steps that come before, falling in love. Like, you see somebody, y'all have to have a conversation before you get to, oh, I like you. Yeah. Oh, I think you're handsome, or I think you're attractive, let's date, and blah, blah, blah. There are a lot of steps. So I'm wondering if you thought about that at all, if your family had any influence on who you date, or if you even know if that's something that's, dominant in the Latino community, or... Yeah. No,
I know a lot of... And I think being immigrants, the narrative that my mom and her friends say is kind of like, we brought our children to this country, so one of the sacrifices, quote unquote, or things is that they're probably not always going to date people who are Mexican. So my sister is engaged to someone who is from India, and
I think that's a rare partnership.
Yeah, and so, as we're, because I'm helping her in terms of, like, what she wants to do for her wedding and stuff. And trying to, like, join the two different cultures is so... I thought it would be a lot easier because both non-white, I was just kind of like... both brown. Like, in general... one of the jokes is that they say that everyone thought I was Indian. Mm-hmm. They were like, you're on the Mexican side? I thought you were on our side. And so, but like, talking to my mom, and I think one of the key things is in terms of like raising kids. And so his mom and a lot of his family, like, they're actually from India. And so they speak, and there's so many different languages in India. I don't know which one in particular they speak. But in just having this conversation, we realized that my sister's kids would have to speak English, Spanish, and then whatever language that his family speaks, just to communicate with everyone in the family. So the kid would have to be trilingual, like, just to be able to speak with family members. And just thinking, like, in terms of, if me having kids with someone who's not Mexican, and then them having to
learn English and Spanish just to be able to communicate with family members is like a whole like issue. And then the families being able to communicate. And so when I'm in the engagement party, I had to like say things in Spanish, and then I had to say things in English, and then like, you know, some jokes don't translate, and everyone was wearing saris, and so, you know, my sister's side of the family, we had to wear saris, and so it was like Mexican people wearing saris, and us having to learn, like, you know, and then my mom never had Indian food, and so, you know, having her introduced to Indian food, and just like the different customs, and so my sister has to have a Mendi night, and just like learning about all these different things, and this is just the wedding, like this isn't even like how they're gonna raise kids, real differences in religion, like it's just like so many differences. And thankfully my sister is vegetarian, so she fits in really well. But like there's a lot of Indians are vegetarian, and so like just imagining, you know, sometimes my mom's the type of person that's like, if there's no meat, like, is this food? And so it's just like there's just so many. And so I think that because my sister is dating someone who's not white, and I had dated someone who's white, but my mom was a little more, I guess, okay with it, but my brothers only date Mexican or Latinas. And I think that were they to date white girls, my mom would not be okay, because one time one of my brothers had like a friendship with this white girl, and my mom, and my mom was like not okay with it.
Wow.
She was like really upset, and like even thinking about it now, I'm like, whoa, is that like a gendered thing where for her it was like, it's okay for my daughters to be with non-white men, like that might be okay, but for my son,
even like to be with non-Mexican,
to be with non-Mexican men, like that might be okay, but for my sons, like they have to have. And and so
do you think that it has something to do with child rearing?
I don't know.
Because, I mean, I know that, you know, I mean, just because of the way that gender works, like, women tend to be the ones that do most of the raising, you know? Or have play the biggest role in raising the kids. And so maybe if a woman were white, then, like, the kids would have maybe... I don't know, maybe that would be the dominant culture that the kids
I think so, because there's definitely, like, a difference in the way where less rigidity, and it's just different the way, you know, things that my sister and her fiance can share a lot about being non-white and make, you know, jokes about not being white, and in ways that I can't always make jokes about white people in the same way because my partner's white. And so, and then, you know, my sister, some of the Indian people, when there's an Indian people and Mexican people can blend in really well. It's just like different, nice hues of brown. But like, so when we go to bars and stuff, like for her engagement party, we looked like a group.
Yeah.
But when it's like my partner and I, like we look like, okay, that's, you know, people look at us and they're like, oh, that's interesting. And at parties, it's like, that's Zalma's family, that's his family, and just kind of like a really stark difference. And so even comparing my experience with my sisters and then my brother's experience with mine, it's just kind of like, not only is it about who, you know, or what the other racial ethnic identity is, but is it the daughter who's dating outside or the son who's dating outside. And in the case of my family, and from what I've seen with my friends, it really, really it's like kind of more okay for the girl. I mean, there are some people who are very much like, well, if you're gonna date, like, I would prefer Mexican, but this is fine. And, you know, side remarks about like, well, you know, it's okay. Like, this is why, you know, we came to this country, so I guess this was gonna happen. But just like this really more rigidity with like the guys and my male friends, like seeking out Latinas specifically, and if they were to date outside their race, having a more difficult time. And I think like maybe it is what you're talking about, where it's like if it has to do with the mom being a different race, then maybe it's gonna be more because the mom's the one that's carrying the kid, the one that's gonna be a lot closer. It's, you know, usually the mom's family who's in the labor and delivery room, who's like helping out with like the newborn, and so maybe there is this fear of more of a division if it's not the daughter.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting. I think, I mean, I guess kind of maybe shifting gears a little bit, I'm thinking about, back to the people, I guess, who are, like, the least likely to be partnered, and wondering, if when there's a really common partnership, there's kind of like a general kind of like how to, we don't, it's not something obviously that's like written down, but like, we can think about how, for instance, if blacks and whites partner, like there isn't really very much like cultural difference. Like, yeah, there is, but it's like, there's this kind of general, like, all right, we probably eat very similar foods. We probably, but I wonder if, like, when there's, like, a language difference, like, how that plays into, just everyday life. It's like, okay, maybe if one person is bilingual, or maybe if both people are bilingual, if they both speak other languages, they can speak English together, but then when the families come together, so I don't want it to, it sucks because I didn't want it to fall all on you. In terms of this conversation, but like it was like a one-sided kind of like interview thing. But I'm wondering too, like, when, if say like your family, you could even talk about like, say at the wedding, like if one side of the family speaks only English and then one side of the family speaks only Spanish, like, do they just not communicate?
And it's really complicated, and because like in my instance, and I think it really, like, partners should really learn the language.
Really?
Yes, because for example, like at a family dinner, like my mom speaks English, but she's not comfortable speaking English, and the English that she knows is like elementary level English, and so she prefers speaking in Spanish because she's a 53-year-old woman. She wants to sound like a 53-year-old woman, not like a 12-year-old, and so, or a 7-year-old, and so she will try to have conversations, but she only can have so limited conversations, and so I find that I can't do anything but translate. So I have to be like, okay, so my mom said, my mom will say something in Spanish, and I'll be like, hey, my mom wants to know blah, blah, blah. He will respond, and then I'll say, Mom, he says blah. And I'm literally having, like, the mediator for this conversation with my partner and my mom. And so, from his perspective, he feels like maybe that's uncomfortable. Like, it's really forced.
For who?
For my mom and for me. He's kind of like, it just feels like I'm having a conversation with you and you're just talking to your mom. And so, a part of that would be fixed, if he learned the language. But even doing that, Spanish, my mom's a 53-year-old woman, and the Spanish she speaks is not going to be the Spanish that someone who just learned Spanish can speak. And so even, like, his mom is taking classes here at the school in Spanish. And she tells me when she texts my mom. And, like, even, like, when she texts my mom, I'm like, it's, like, not correct. Like, and she's taking classes. And
so how did your mom care? Like,
my mom told me, how should I respond? Do I respond in English or do I respond in Spanish? And because she didn't know if she was just trying to communicate with her, or if she was trying to practice, if she was trying to learn. And so I told my mom, respond to her in Spanish. So my mom responds to her in Spanish, and then his mom is like, Zama, I don't understand what she's saying. Because it's still like, and so even when, like, people are trying to learn, and, everyone in this country has had to have a second language. And so these aren't people who just never took Spanish. Like, my partner we were actually in the same Spanish class. Like, we took 4 years of Spanish, and he took Spanish in college. So it's not like he doesn't know anything, but it's just if you don't use it every day, and then the type of vocabulary that my mom uses. And so in, like, family functions, or, like, at my sister's engagement party, there's just so much effort that has to be put forward to just communicate with basic things, that sometimes it is easier just to be like, you know what, hi. Nice to meet you. And then just kind of, like, you stick with, on your side, and you stick to your side. And so when there are, like, language differences and language barriers, it is a lot more difficult to try to be like a family. And so in a lot of our functions, the Spanish speakers sit on one end, the English speakers sit on another, the Spanish speakers speak to each other, the English people speak to each other, And to me, I'm just like, this is unity. Like, just the fact that everyone is, like, sitting here, saying hello to each other. They'll have, like, really, really small, short conversations, like, hola, ¿cómo estás? Muy bien. And then that's it. And it's just because, like, that's all they're, like, able to do. And so it's just, sometimes it's just, and then one of the things we want to talk about is, like, is there anything lost or sacrificed in an interracial relationship? And when there's language differences, there's, like, this inability to really get to know someone at the level that you would if y'all spoke the same language at the same level. Because even if my partner were to speak Spanish right now, how could he catch up to someone who's been speaking it for 50 years? Like, how could he catch up to the slang, to the metaphors? I've been speaking English now, like, 20-something years, and I, like, learn new things every day. I have to be taught, like, metaphors and references, and so it's just, like, it's so difficult. And so I think that when there's cultural differences, in addition to these language barriers, there is a sense of, like, you're just not going to be able to know them at the same level that two people who have families that speak the same language. And so that's just something that interracial couples who have to deal with language barriers have to deal with. The fact that, like, okay, like, for us, we might not be able to communicate for our kids. It is very, very important that they're fluent in these different languages so that at least they can communicate with that side and they can communicate with that side. And so what I've kind of noticed is just kind of being like, scrap this generation, next generation of kids, they're going to be able to communicate way better, but this is, like, the best we can do for us.
Yeah, and I wonder, too, if that, you know, if those kinds of considerations influence who people date or don't date. Yeah. You know, because I, for instance, I have a friend who is Indian, and she talked to me about how, you know, like, so in India, you know, arranged marriage is still very you know, prevalent. Yeah. And actually that's the primary way of, like, you know, partnering. And and one of the reasons that it's still so prominent is because it's enforced by the grandparents. And so, like you said, like in India, there are a ton of different languages, right? Mm-hmm. So even though it's like the same, like it's even though it's the same country, there's so many different ethnic groups within the country. And so the grandparents are like, well, we need to be able to communicate with our in-laws, so we're going to choose the partner. Like, you know, there's a ton of other things that go into it, obviously, but that's one of the factors, right? And so for them, it's, like, imposed on them. And, I mean, it's not like the children are, like, oh, like, not okay with it. You know, like, this is the custom and stuff like that, so they're okay with it. But it's essentially kind of imposed on them that, you know, we need to be able to communicate. Like, that's important to the family to be unified. And so that's the norm there, and that isn't necessarily the norm here. But I wonder if those types of considerations do influence who people choose on their own. It's like, well, our parents wouldn't be able to communicate, so it's not gonna work out. Or, like, even, like, say in college, you know, like some, like, there were a couple, like, African guys that I dated, and it was, you know, kind of they themselves didn't tell me this, but I had friends who, like, say were from the same country as them, or, like, from the same tribe, who were like, yeah, this isn't going to be able to be serious. Like, he's never going to be able to introduce you to his mother. Because the knowledge that, like you're saying, like, it's a gendered thing, right? So for his sisters it was acceptable for them to partner with men that were, say, not Ethiopian, or not Eritrean, or not Nigerian. But it wasn't okay for the sons, because then if the son marries someone who is black, or who is, say, not from the same country, the kids wouldn't, you know, learn the language. This is the assumption. The kids wouldn't learn the language. The kids wouldn't be able to get the food made the proper way, because, you know, the woman is who cooks in their, like, tradition. And so it was all of these things that, like, the idea that all these things wouldn't be passed on to the next generation. You know, so I know that for a lot of guys that, you know, if culture is very important to their family, and it's very important that it be passed on to, like, their kids, the mom a lot of times has a lot of influence on who they bring home. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case for women. For my friends, it's not. Like, they're kind of allowed to partner with whoever they want. Yeah. You know? And like you're saying, like with your mom, it's like, nah, you know? Yeah, but the language component is something that, you know, I'm just now thinking about and talking to you. It's
Yeah.
like, I was trying to imagine, and like, I don't know. I mean, there's obviously certain things that don't translate. Like, I'm thinking about one, like, my family has a lot of, my family is really close, and then we have, like, a lot of family nights, like, game nights and stuff like that, what we did when I was there. And so, one Christmas, I brought home, like, this white guy I was dating, and you could tell that it was just so different for him, because like our family, like it was just, everybody was pretty loud, and like we're really competitive, and so it's like we're not angry at each other, but we're like talking shit, to the other team and stuff like that. And then he's just like trying to like fit in but not overstep, so it was, some of that stuff was kind of interesting, and how like my family didn't care one way or another that he was white, but I'm wondering for him, like, if it was, like I had my aunts there, like, Mexican aunts, and a Filipino aunt. So for him, it was, maybe he felt like, okay, it's okay for someone who is not black to be here, but he was the only white person. Yeah. So, I guess there's that, but like if he, I don't know, if like maybe he brought his mom and his mom didn't speak English, that would probably have been like, maybe kind of scary. Like,
how do you talk to someone you can't talk to?
Yeah, exactly. And so is your mother-in-law taking Spanish classes just to be able to communicate with your mom? Or is she, like, just kind of...
I think it was greatly inspired by the fact that for years she wanted to communicate with my family, and then just being like, she's the type of person that always wants to learn and always wants to do something. So it was kind of like a pragmatic thing where she's like, this will be really useful. Yeah. It will be really useful for me to learn this. And so, but I think that, the only people in her life that she can use this new language on is my family. Yeah. And so...
Do you think that your mom, like, appreciates it?
Yes, my mom does. My mom always appreciates it. And she does make these side comments about, like, how my partner didn't learn Spanish, and how, and then my partner saying, like, if we have kids, that he would feel left out if, the kid would speak Spanish, because he's like, you guys are going to talk shit, and I won't know, like, what you guys are talking about. And I was like,
that's
like, I was like, if you don't learn it, then, and so I feel like, kids in the picture is more motivation for, interracial couples who, if one of them doesn't speak the language, to feel more motivated, because now, like, there's literally something you lose, which is an inability to, like, speak with your kid.
Maybe he can learn it at the same time as your kid. Yeah. Because then it would be kind of like at a similar pace.
Level.
Yeah. Because I'm just thinking, like, as someone who definitely, like, took Spanish classes, as someone who is from, a community that is predominantly Spanish speaking, and even as someone who, like I was telling you this, like, the first language that I learned was Spanish. My parents didn't speak Spanish, so it just, like, completely got lost, But one thing that I was always very excited by is people always, like, along the way, like, Spanish speakers complimented me on, like, my pronunciation and stuff like that. So it's like, oh, well, it's there. But if, like you're saying, if you don't talk to somebody on a regular basis, like, not only do you lose it, but you don't advance. Because the language, like, the Spanish that they're teaching you in school is, like, Spanish that people don't even speak conversationally. It's this super, like, it's kind of trivial, like, words that you're never probably going to use.
Like, where's the bathroom?
Yeah, it's, like, stuff that doesn't even matter. And so it's, like, how do you learn... I don't know. It seems like it would be kind of scary to be, like, have to be super conscientious of the words that you're using, and am I pronouncing it right? Am I, or like, like even traveling, knowing that, like, traveling and being kind of forced to like, for instance, like when we went to Spain, like earlier this year. And so there were things that, like, I could understand, but when I'm trying to speak back, I was so nervous and just like, oh, I left that word out. And, people were like, really happy. They're like, oh, look at you, like, trying to speak it or whatever. And I was happy to have them correct me, and they did. But I was nervous. Like, I was like, oh God, like, I understood like 4 words out of that sentence. What do I say? What do I say? So I don't know. Like, I don't know. I just couldn't. I couldn't imagine.
It's a whole different, like, it's a whole different obstacle, a whole different, like, that impacts almost every interaction that you have.
Yeah.
And so just like for people who don't experience that, like, just imagine, like, if your partner's parents didn't speak the language, like, how would they get to know the other side of your family?
Yeah.
How would they interact with your partner? And, like, even having to think about that, you're like, shit, I don't even know how that would happen. Like, what would a dinner look like? And so a lot of times there's just, I think it leads to not really being able to fully, like, I just don't think they'll ever really get to know who my mom is in the way that they could if they spoke Spanish. And so they don't get to know her humor because you have to speak Spanish. Even if you know Spanish, you don't, it's different than, you know, it's different to know how to say the colors in the alphabet than it is to understand a joke.
That's what they teach you in class.
Yeah, that's different than to say a joke that my mom is saying. And so you don't get to really get to know my mom in the same way. So I feel like my partner knows my mom through me. So like, I tell him about my mom, and I always have to give context, and I summarize what my mom says, or I summarize things, and that's how he knows my mom, but not in a way that he would know my mom if they were able to both fluently speak a language. But I think they're getting there, and I'm hoping that, you know, with the introduction of a family and forcing more of his family to be able to communicate, because I think that once there's kids that speak another language, you want to be able to communicate with them, and you'll feel left out if the kid is speaking a language and you have no idea what the kid is saying.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that works both ways? Like, do you think that your mom would, like, want to be able to communicate with your kid too? Like, or understand what your kid was saying if they were speaking English?
Yeah. And my mom understands a lot of English. She's just, her accent is so thick, she's really embarrassed about speaking English to people who are, like, adults. So I think with kids, I hear my mom speaking with kids all the time, and she has, like, no problem speaking English with kids because she really, they're not as critical as I think an adult would be in, like, correcting her grammar and saying, like, what do you mean? It's like, you know, kids and her at the same level of English. Yeah. So they both understand each other pretty well, but I think that as you know, if I have a kid and, like, as they get older, high school and college, my mom will definitely want to be able to communicate. But knowing my mom, she'll probably, and what I want her to be is, like, the Spanish person. And so, like, to be able to, my kid, converse with her, because as much Spanish as I learned, like, it's still not the same. You know, I don't speak it every day in the same way.
Yeah, that was one thing I was gonna bring up too, is, like, I've seen, like, I have friends, right, whose grandmothers live here, but they are, like, their grandmothers are immigrants, right? And so even if my friend speaks the language, they don't speak it as well as their grandmother. And so there are things that, like, even they don't understand as, like, you know, first generation Americans, you know? And so, I mean, I think that's, you know, there was this one meme that was kind of circulating where there was a grandma who was, I want to say she spoke Hindi, and she was old, like, she was, like, in her 70s, and she was taking an English class and learning English so she could speak to her granddaughter, who, like, spoke Hindi, but it was, like, broken, you know, like how you would learn it in school. Yeah. You know, and so, I thought it was, I was like, I wonder, you know, on the one hand, if the granddaughter thought about trying to improve her Hindi, but then I thought it was, like, you know, interesting that the grandma was like, I'm even gonna try to learn English, like, where it's, you know, you're, like, old. Like, so it's, like, I mean, like you were saying, there's no way that even if her granddaughter is, like, in her 20s, like, there's no way that you can catch up on 20 years of English. Yeah. But I thought it was interesting that she, you know, was trying to learn it. You know? I was like, I mean,
I could see my mom doing that, and it'll be interesting to see as, you know, relationships get more serious and there's family now and there's parenting, like how that changes the dynamic. So maybe what was sustainable right now for just a relationship won't be as sustainable when there are kids involved. And so I'll keep people posted as to, like,
maybe how, start a blog.
Yeah, no, for real. I'll like be able to share, you know, what that looks like as things change, but definitely see why there's good conversations to have about this, because it's so complicated, and it changes as families grow, and it changes as relationships get serious. Being in an interracial relationship is different when you're dating than when you're married than when you have kids. And so definitely, you know, was an episode that we wanted to talk about and share my experience, because I've been in a 6-year relationship with someone who's not of my ethnicity, and so just how that has changed for me as I've gotten to the different stages of it.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up there. Thanks so much for listening.
Yes, and once again, if you have any comments, any questions, feel free to email us at woke.ishpodcast@gmail.com. And you can also DM us at our Instagram, which is wokeishpodcast.
Yeah, and you can tweet us at wokeishtalk, and we are super vigilant, so we'll see all of that, and we'll get right back to you. Thank you to everybody that's been pretty active on our Instagram page. That's super appreciated. We love talking to y'all.
Yes, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.